Okay, here we are. I'm going to do shake hands with the devil now. And I'm going to lead this off with a few things. Again, because it's having to do with religious propaganda, in that there are some religions in the world that believe they are superior and they're God's chosen people, but they're not. The Bible says to be aware. Beware of those who say that they are Christians and are not. Beware of those who say they are Jews and are not. Because there's interlopers and intruders and infiltrators, those who speak of virtue and do none of it. No practice. They just proselytize and speak, and that's it. They don't worship God. They don't worship the Creator. They don't give back to the earth. They don't sacrifice their time or their resources for other people. And what they do is incestuous and greedy and gluttony. Now, I am not a preacher by any means, but what I am is a historian, amongst other things. And war is blood sacrifice. That's what it is. It's blood sacrifice upon the battlefield, and to see which family comes out on top, right? And the suppression of the truth is the propaganda that tries to lead people away from religion. Well, not just religion, but the tradition of faith and community that keeps us all together. You know, and this isolation of COVID, you know what? If you're going to ask me from a religious context as to what that was a mass sacrifice of so many people for the worship of Baphomet, Moloch, and Beelzebub, and other devilish figures within mythos and myth. You know, these evil characters of the lower vibrations, because higher frequency is godly, whereas low frequency is evil because it takes away. Right? That's where, you know, the emotion comes from when you listen to music and certain pitches and frequencies, because we are vibrational energy-based beings. And then when you go inside the church, say a Catholic church, you know, you look at the arches, okay? And what you're doing, what that symbology is that you're entering the Mother Mary, because Mother is provider, and God is the Son. And God is the being that looks out for everything outside. And these are other reasons for the architecture, the spires, and the decorations and everything, because they're concentrations of energy gathering into stone, and you're isolating yourself from outside forces, right? So this is the language that religious people use, and I'm going to come from this a little bit more historical, art history, and scientific. Because this is what I know, having been on the internet since 1997 and observing people as a social outcast ever since I came to London, if not a few years before that. You know, because what else am I going to do with my life except to communicate this and put this on YouTube to push it into the face of those who wish to see humanity fail, and to push us into servitude to a false idol that is AI, Moloch. Right? That's what they want to do, you know, if you're going to go by a religious standpoint, a perspective, is to, the Moshiach, that's what it is. You know, the synagogue of Satan. Let's be clear about that. Yeah, there's blood sacrifices involved in the initiation into that rite. And if you didn't know this, you know, I just posted this on my Facebook and my LinkedIn as well. I didn't know this myself, that Judaism has a caste structure like the Indians, the Hindus do. Mind blown. Absolute nuke. Right? A true threat to the nature of the structure that is the society constructed and usurped by these people. Because they thought that they were God's chosen people. But you know what happened to God's chosen people in the Old Testament? They spent 40 years in the desert for creating false idols. And again, going by the other stories like Sodom and Gomorrah. Some say that Sodom and Gomorrah is a place within the body of ourselves. But if you take the literal interpretation, it was an actual physical place that was burnt to a crisp by a nuke within in the area of Egypt, Israel, Syria, something like that. Go ahead and look it up. There's many different interpretations, and hence the word, and that's why we have scholars and priests and priestesses and so on and so forth by religious traditions, nuns and priests, or ministers, right? And here's the thing: is that this is why certain aspects of humanity are so evil and are so counterproductive, but they influence our everyday day-to-day lives, especially more now so with social media and in the banking system and the pharmaceuticals and the technology, because some people they place these false idols, a black mirror, right, a monolith to human creation, but creation is divine, right? So and I said this, I just put this on the previous video talking about transgenderism, and from a religious standpoint as to why it's a monstrosity and why it's so offensive. And the same with homosexuality, right, or sodomy, right, or sadomasochism, because these things involve pain and the worship of pain. And when those wires are entirely crossed, and when you don't seek help, again, approaching this from a more religious standpoint, since it's a Sunday, when you don't seek help from above and from the Creator, and you don't seek solace in community, and you isolate yourself from the rest of the electromagnetic family that we are, then I can't help you. I can't help you. That's suicidal. But then again, the suicide is the reason and one of the motivations of sacrifice. I'm not responsible if for committing genocide if the person takes the information and this feedback and decides to do this to themselves, displace the blame. All these societal pressures that are included with the bombasting of the propaganda, weaponized art and messages. This desire and gluttony, hedonism. That's what it is, right? You get down to hedonism, like the cult of Dionysus, right? That's what they are. They're occults, right? And this stuff, it drove my uncle crazy to a point, because he started to see the symbolism everywhere he went. And he kept second guessing as to who and what it was for. Because the symbolism is everywhere, and that's exactly how it works, is through ignorance. And I'm not going to throw any one group or society under the table, because psychopathy and sociopathy and narcissism, they permeate every single organization that has a constituency of humanity, right? And when you get down to genocide, right, which is what this is about, right, and trying to live forever as a human being instead of a spiritual one, then what happens is the heart of darkness, the horror. So what's another horror of humanity? Child sacrifice, rape, and pillage of women. The forceful kind, not the consensual. No, it's funny, because then when you get into role play, naturally, that's a bit different. But when there's just some sort of, because rape can be, any number of things besides against a woman. It can be the rape of an entire society, removing the dignity of the person and the society altogether. Now, one of the main characters in the Rwandan genocide, of course, is Mugabe, Robert Mugabe, right? If I remember correctly. And he was on the radio encouraging, again, either the Hutus or the Tutsis to go out and with machetes and knives and whatever, dehumanizing the opposing group to just completely eliminate them. Because there's a religious context to wars throughout history, and say like Jews versus Christians, or Jews versus Muslims, or Muslim versus Christian, or all three together. This is the reason for the Crusades, because it was all over who gets control of Jerusalem, and the meteorite that happens to be there, and also at Mecca, because astronomy was first conceived in Northern European heritage in the church by monks. And monks were the first ones to write things down and put them into books with illuminated manuscripts. Because you had those who could read and those who couldn't. And it was a transference from oral tradition to written tradition. So, I'm going to read as much as I'm going to tolerate on this. But, Dallaire obviously has suffered enough to write a volume like this. And all credit to him, the fact that he's still around to talk about it, as far as I know. Let's see. Let's check the online. Yes, 76 years old, born in 1946. Now, there's some things that happened immediately after the Second World War. There's 3 organizations, so let's look up. I'm looking up the IMF here. Formation 27th December 1945. Okay, another one I'm going to look up is CIA. Formation September 18th, 1947. And then the UN. So the UN was formed in 26 June 1945. Chartered entered into force 24th October 1945. Now the UN is in New York, as we all know. And the land was given by bankers, if I believe correctly. Right? Now, I have nothing against the CIA, because intelligence is all about preventing open war. Trying to again prevent open conflict. And so because the most intelligent thing to do is to not fight. Because blood sacrifice, that's what happens in wars of attrition. Everybody dies, right? It's not in most cases, especially say like trench warfare, the First World War, and the inception of the First World War being a family squabble over who was going to have whom and who was going to have the crown, etc. As it always has been, right? Like, all the way throughout history with the monarchies before the conceptualization of democracy, and the first parliaments. So then you have the French Revolution, of 1789. So shook France between 1787 and 1799, and then the first parliament in Britain. Cromwell. Alexander Cromwell, if I remember correctly. First English Parliament was convened in 1215, signing of the Magna Carta. Oh, Carmel is supposed to be the first. No. I have so much information in my head, it gets jumbled up. Sir Oliver Cromwell. Okay. That's right. Oliver Cromwell, 1599 through this 3rd of September, 1658. Was regarded as one of the most important statesmen in English history. He came to prominence during the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, first as a senior commander of the Parliamentarian Army and then a politician. Parents Robert Cromwell, Elizabeth Stewart. Yeah. Okay. So blood sacrifices, genocide, Satanism, and witchcraft. These things don't exist. You don't know anything about this. You don't know anything about this. Forget what you've seen. Are you ready? So first, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. To the Rwandans abandoned to their fate, who were slaughtered in the hundreds of thousands. To the 15 UN soldiers under my command who died bravely in the service of peace and humanity. Lieutenant Lotin, First Sergeant Leroy, Corporal Bassin, Corporal Lore, Corporal Mieux, Corporal Plessier, Corporal Dupont, Corporal Oyetterberuk, Private Debati, Private Renoir, Lance Corporal Edor, Private Mensa Bedu, Captain Mabe, Major Sosa, Captain Enka. To Cyan Cansfield, research journalist and dear friend who died on June 1st, 2002, while working so hard to tell this story. So I'm going to skip the preface. We'll get right down to the bones of the matter. It was an absolutely magnificent day in May 1994. The blue sky was cloudless, and there was a whiff of breeze stirring the trees. It was hard to believe that in the past weeks of unimaginable evil had turned Rwanda's gentle green valleys and mist-capped hills into a stinking nightmare of rotting corpses. A nightmare we all had to negotiate every day. A nightmare that, as commander of the UN peacekeeping force in Rwanda, I could not help but feel deeply responsible for. In relative terms, that day had been a good one. Under the protection of a limited and fragile ceasefire, my troops had successfully escorted about 200 civilians, a few of the 1,000 who had sought refuge with us in Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, though many government and militia-manned checkpoints are through them, to reach safety behind the Rwandese patriotic front lines. We were 7 weeks into the genocide, and the RPF, the disciplined rebel army, composed largely of the sons of Rwandan refugees who had lived over the border in camps in Uganda since being forced out of their homeland at independence, was making a curved sweep towards Kigali from the north, adding civil war to the chaos and butchery into the country. Having delivered our precious cargo of innocent souls, we were headed back to Kigali in a white UN Land Cruiser with my force commander pennant on the roof of the pennant on the front hood and the blue UN flag on a flagstaff attached to the right rear. My Ghanaian sharpshooter, armed with a new Canadian C7 rifle, rode behind me, and my new Senegalese aide-de-camp, Captain Ndeye, sat to my right. We were driving a particularly dangerous stretch of road, open to sniper fire. Most of the people in the surrounding villages had been slaughtered, the few survivors escaping with little more than the clothes on their backs. In a few short weeks, it had become a lonely and forlorn place. Suddenly up ahead, we saw a child wandering across the road. I stopped the vehicle close to the little boy, worried about scaring him off, but he was quite unfazed. He was about 3 years old, dressed in a filthy torn t-shirt, the ragged remnants of underwear little more than a loincloth, drooping from under his distended belly. He was caked in dirt, his hair white and matted with dust, and he was enveloped in a cloud of flies, which were greedily attacking the open sores that covered him. He stared at us silently, sucking at what I realized was a high-protein biscuit. Where had the boy found food in this wasteland? I got out of the vehicle and walked towards him. Maybe it was the condition I was in, but to me this child had the face of an angel and the eyes of pure innocence. I had seen so many children hacked to pieces that this small, whole, bewildered boy was a vision of hope. Surely he could not have survived all on his own. I motioned for my aide-de-camp to honk the horn, hoping to summon up his parents, but the sound echoed over the empty landscape, startling a few birds and little else. The boy remained transfixed. He did not speak or cry, just stood sucking on his biscuit and staring up with his huge, solemn eyes, still hoping that he wasn't all alone. I sent my aide-de-camp and the sharpshooter to look for signs of life. We were in a ravine lush with banana trees and bamboo shoots, which created a dense canopy of foliage. A long straggle of deserted huts stood on either side of the road. As I stood alone with the boy, I felt an anxious knot in my stomach. This would have been a perfect place to stage an ambush. My colleagues returned, having found no one. Then a rustling in the undergrowth made us jump. I grabbed the boy and held him firmly to my side, and we instinctively took up the defensive positions around the vehicle and in the ditch. The bushes parted to reveal a well-armed RPF soldier about 15 years old. He recognized my uniform and gave me a smart salute and introduced himself. He was part of an advanced observation post in the nearby hills. I asked him who the boy was and whether there was anyone left alive in the village who could take care of him. The soldier answered that the boy had no name and no family, but that he and his buddies were looking after him. That explained the biscuit, but it did nothing to allay my concerns over the security and health of the boy. I protested that the child needed proper care and that I could give it to him. We were protecting and supporting orphanages in Kigali, where he would be much better off. The soldier quietly insisted that the boy stay where he was, among his own people. I continued to argue, but this child soldier was in no mood to discuss the situation with haughty finality, stated that his unit would care and provide for this child. I could feel my face flush with anger and frustration, but then noticed that the boy himself had slipped away while we had been arguing over him. And God only knew where he had gone. My aide-de-camp spotted him at the entrance to a hut short distance away, clambering over a log that had fallen across the doorway. I ran after him, closely followed by my aide-de-camp and the RPF child soldier. By the time I had caught up with the boy, he had disappeared inside. The log in the doorway turned out to be the body of a man, obviously dead for some weeks, his flesh rotten with maggots and beginning to fall away from the bones. As I stumbled over the body into the hut, a swarm of flies invaded my nose and mouth. It was so dark inside that at first I smelled rather than saw the horror that lay before me. The hut was a two-room affair, one room serving as a kitchen and living room, and the other as a communal bedroom. Two rough windows had been cut into the mud and stick wall. Very little light penetrated the gloom, but as my eyes became accustomed to the dark, I saw strewn around the living room in a rough circle the decayed bodies of a man, a woman, and two children, stark white bone poking through the desiccated leather-like covering that had once been skin. The little boy had crouched beside what was left of his mother, still sucking on his biscuit. I made my way over to him as slowly, as quick and quietly as I could, lifting him into my arms, carried him out of the hut. The warmth of his tiny body snuggled against mine filled me with peace and serenity that elevated me above the chaos. This child was alive yet terribly hungry, beautiful but covered in dirt, bewildered but not fearful. I made up my mind. This boy would be the fourth child in the Dallaire family. I couldn't save Rwanda, but I could save this child. Before I held this boy, I had agreed with the aid workers and representatives of both the warring armies that I would not permit any exporting of Rwandan orphans to foreign places. When confronted by such requests from humanitarian organizations, I would argue that the money to move 100 kids by plane to France or Belgium could help build, staff, and sustain Rwandan orphanages that could house 3,000 children. This one boy eradicated all of my arguments. I could see myself arriving at the terminal in Montreal like a Latter-day Saint Christopher with the boy cradled in my arms and my wife, Beth, there ready to embrace him. That dream was abruptly destroyed when the young soldier, fast as a wolf, yanked the child from my arms and carried him directly into the bush. Not knowing how many members of his unit might already have their gunfire on us, we reluctantly climbed back into the Land Cruiser. As I slowly drove away, I had much on my mind. By withdrawing, I had undoubtedly done the wise thing. I had avoided risking the lives of my two soldiers in what would have been a fruitless struggle over one small boy. But in that moment, it seemed to me that I had backed away from a fight for what was right, that this failure stood for all of failures in Rwanda. Whatever happened to this beautiful child? Did he make it to an orphanage deep behind the RPF lines? Did he survive the following battles? Is he dead, or is he now a child soldier himself, caught in the seemingly endless conflict that plagues his homeland? That moment when the boy, in the arms of the soldier young enough to be his brother, was swallowed whole by the forest. It haunts me. It's a memory that never lets me forget how ineffective and irresponsible we were when we promised the Rwandans that we would establish an atmosphere of security that would allow them to achieve a lasting peace. It had been almost 9 years since I left Rwanda, but as I write this, the sounds, smells, and colors come flooding back in digital clarity. It's as if someone had sliced into my brain and grafted this horror called Rwanda, framed by blood-soaked frame, directly onto my cortex. I could not forget even if I wanted to. For many of these years, I yearned to return to Rwanda and disappear into the blue-green hills with my ghosts, a simple pilgrim seeking forgiveness and pardon. But as I slowly begin to piece my life back together, I know the time has come for me to make a more difficult pilgrimage, to travel back through all those terrible memories and retrieve my soul. I did try to write this story soon after I came back from Rwanda in September 1994, hoping to find some respite for myself in sorting out how my own role as force commander of UN Amir interconnected with the international apathy, the complex political maneuvers, the deep well of hatred, and barbarity that resulted in a genocide in which over 800,000 people lost their lives. Instead, I plunged into the disastrous mental health spiral that led me to suicide attempts, a medical release from the armed forces, the diagnosis of PTSD, and dozens upon dozens of therapy sessions and extensive medication which still have a place in my daily life. It took me 7 years to finally have the desire, the willpower, and the stamina to begin to describe in detail the events of that year in Rwanda, to recount from an insider's point of view how a country moved from the promise of a certain peace to intrigue, the fomenting of racial hatred, assassinations, civil war, and genocide, and how the international community, through an inept UN mandate and what can only be described as indifference, self-interest, and racism, aided and abetted these crimes against humanity. How we all helped create the mess that has murdered and displaced millions and destabilized the whole Central African region. A growing library of books and articles is exploring the tragic events in Rwanda from many angles: eyewitness accounts, media analysis, assaults on the actions of the American administration at the time, condemnations of the UN's apparent ineptitude. But even in the international and national inquiries launched in the wake of the genocide, the blame somehow slides away from the individual members of nations of the UN, and in particular those influential countries with permanent representatives on the Security Council, such as the United States, France, and the United Kingdom, who sat back and watched it all happen, who pulled their troops or didn't offer any troops in the first place. A few Belgian officers were brought to court to pay for the sins of Rwanda. When my sector commander in Kigali, Colonel Luc Marshal, was court-martialed in Brussels, the charges against him were clearly designed to deflect any responsibility away from the Belgian government for the deaths of the 10 Belgian peacekeepers under my command. The judge eventually threw out all the charges, accepting the fact that Marshal had performed his duties magnificently in a near impossible situation. But the spotlight never turned to the reasons why he and the rest of the UNAMIR force were in such a dangerous situation in the first place. It is time that I tell this story from where I stood, literally in the middle of the slaughter for weeks on end. A public account of my actions, my decisions, and my failures during the most terrible year may be a crucial missing link for those attempting to understand the tragedy both intellectually and in their hearts. I know that I will never end my mourning for all these Rwandans who placed their faith in us, who thought the UN peacekeeping force was there to stop extremism, to stop the killings and help them through the perilous journey to a lasting peace. That mission, UNAMIR, failed. I know intimately the cost of human lives and the inflexible UN Security Council mandate, the penny-pinching financial management of the mission, the UN red tape, the political manipulations, and my own personal limitations. What I've come to realize is that